The emergency beacon crackled through the comm system of the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, its red warning light casting ominous shadows across the sterile walls. Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her xenobiology reports, her coffee growing cold as she listened to the panic transmission from the planetary surface. "This is Ranger Station Alpha 7, came the trembling voice of Zolthek, a Vortic ranger whose species had evolved from pack hunters. "We have a code red situation. The Shadow Maw cubs are trapped in the crystal caves after yesterday's seismic event. The entrance collapsed, but we can hear them crying." Elena frowned, pulling up the planetary database. Shadow Maws were Kepler 442b's primary apex predator, 12 feet of muscle, razor-sharp claws, and teeth that could shear through titanium. Even their cubs, barely the size of Earth lions, possessed enough strength to crush a Vortex exoskeleton. "What's the situation with the rescue attempts?" Elena asked into her comm. Zolthek's mandibles clicked nervously, a sound that translated poorly through the universal translator. That's the problem, Dr. Vasquez. The adult Shadow Maws are circling the collapse site. 3 breeding pairs, maybe more. They won't let anyone near their young, but they also can't reach them. The cave opening is too narrow for adult Shadow Maws and too dangerous for our equipment. What about your emergency response teams? A long pause. Even our apex predator specialists refuse to approach. The Shadow Maws are. They're in distress, unpredictable. One wrong move and they'll tear apart anything that gets close. But if we don't get those cubs out soon, they'll starve or suffocate. Elena set down her coffee and walked to the observation deck, gazing down at the purple-tinged atmosphere of the planet below. She'd been studying the local ecosystem for 3 years, but this was different. This wasn't about research, it was about life and death. "I'll come down," she said simply. The silence on the comm was deafening. Finally, Zolthek's voice crackled back, filled with disbelief. "Dr. Vasquez, with respect, you're human. You have no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no evolutionary adaptations for dealing with apex predators. This is suicide." Elena was already moving toward the shuttle bay, grabbing her field gear. That's exactly why it might work. 2 hours later, Elena stood at the edge of the crystal caves, surrounded by a perimeter of nervous Vortic rangers, who maintained a respectful distance from the 6 massive Shadow Maws pacing near the collapsed entrance. The creatures were magnificent and terrifying. Their obsidian fur rippled with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with their emotional state, currently an angry red that spoke of desperation and rage. The largest male, easily 14 feet from nose to tail, noticed Elena's approach first. Its massive head swiveled toward her, yellow eyes fixing on the small human with predatory focus. A low growl rumbled from its throat, but Elena didn't stop walking. "Easy," she whispered, not to the beast, but to herself. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she'd studied these creatures long enough to understand something the others had missed. Shadow Maws were intelligent. More than that, they were emotional creatures. And right now, they weren't acting like predators. They were acting like terrified parents. Elena dropped to her knees 20 feet from the nearest female, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. She pulled out her field recorder and began playing back sounds she collected over months of research. Not the hunting calls or territorial roars, but something else entirely. The gentle purring sounds that Shadow Maw mothers made to comfort their young. The effect was immediate. The red bioluminescence flickered, shifting toward blue confusion, hope. The massive creatures stopped pacing and turned to stare at the tiny human making their sounds back to them. Elena slowly reached into her pack and pulled out a small device, a bioscanner that could detect life signs through solid matter. She held it up, pointing it toward the collapsed cave entrance, and activated its audible function. The steady beat, beep, beep of multiple heartbeats filled the air. The Shadow Maws understood immediately. Their patterns shifted to bright gold relief, gratitude. Elena stood slowly and approached the cave entrance. The shadow maws parted before her, their massive heads following her every movement. She could feel their breath on her back, could sense the barely controlled power in their muscles. But she also felt something else trust. At the cave entrance, Elena examined the rubble. The gap was indeed too narrow for an adult shadow maw, but just wide enough for a human. She could hear the frightened mewling of the cubs trapped inside, and her heart clenched. She turned to the watching shadow maws and spoke in the universal translator, knowing they could understand even if they couldn't respond in kind. "I'm going to get your babies, but I need you to trust me." What followed was the longest 30 minutes of Elena's life. She squeezed through the narrow opening, her body scraping against jagged crystal formations. Inside, she found 4 cubs, barely weeks old, huddled together in the darkness. They were scared but uninjured. One by one, she carried them back through the narrow passage. Each time she emerged with a cub, the adult shadow maws would gently take their young with a carefulness that seemed impossible for such massive predators. Their bioluminescent patterns had shifted to warm gold and soft green love, gratitude, family. When the last cub was safely returned, Elena found herself surrounded by 6 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. But instead of fear, she felt something unprecedented acceptance. The largest male approached her slowly and lowered his massive head, gently pressing his forehead against her chest in what she recognized as a gesture of deep respect among their species. Later, back at the ranger station, Zolfek stared at Elena with something approaching awe. "How did you know they wouldn't kill you?" Elena cleaned crystal dust from her equipment, considering the question. "Because I understood something everyone else missed. They weren't acting like predators. In that moment, they were acting like parents. And parents, no matter what species, will recognize someone trying to help their children." She paused, looking out at the cave entrance where the Shadow Maw family was settling down for the night. Their young safe and sound. "That's the thing about humans," Elena continued. "We don't have claws or armor or natural weapons. But we have something else. We have the ability to see past what something is and recognize what it needs. Sometimes that's more powerful than any evolutionary advantage." From that day forward, the Shadow Maws of Kepler 442b would approach human researchers with curiosity rather than aggression, as if word had spread through their species about the small, brave creature who had risked everything to save their young. And Elena Vasquez became the first xenobiologist to conduct field research alongside apex predators, not as their superior or their prey, but as something far more precious, their trusted friend.